Right now, over 5 billion people, that's 5 billion, are watching or following the FIFA World Cup. It is the single most watched event in human history, and somewhere near you is a person who genuinely could not care less. Not pretending, not being edgy, just nothing. So what's actually going on inside their brain? If you clicked this, one of two things is true. Either you're the person who doesn't care and you want to know if something is wrong with you. Or you know that person, and you've spent the last 2 weeks saying, "How are you not excited about this?" Here's what I'll tell you by the end of this video. There is nothing wrong with people who don't care about the World Cup, but their brain is doing something fundamentally different from fans, and once you understand what that is, you'll understand a lot more about yourself and the people around you. We're going to break down the exact psychological reasons some people are wired to tune sports out entirely, why social pressure to join in actually backfires and makes people care even less, the personality trait that almost perfectly predicts World Cup apathy, and why some of the most psychologically secure people on Earth are the ones watching 0 minutes of this tournament. Let's get into it. Here's where it starts. In 1979, a social psychologist named Henri Tajfel introduced what became one of the most important ideas in all of modern psychology: social identity theory. The core idea is this: human beings don't just have a personal identity, who I am as an individual. We also build a social identity, who I am as part of a group. And here's the wild part, that social identity is so powerful that when your group wins, your brain processes it almost identically to you personally winning. That's why fans scream, "We scored!" Even though they were sitting on a couch eating nachos. Their brain has merged the team's experience with their own. There's even a name for this. Psychologist Robert Cialdini called it BIRGing, basking in reflected glory. Research from 1976 showed that after a team wins, fans are dramatically more likely to wear team merchandise and say, "We won." And after a loss, they say they lost. The self unconsciously steps away from failure and leans into victory. Pause, let it land. Now here's the key. For a non-fan, someone who doesn't care about the World Cup, this mental merger never happened. Their brain never built a social identity around the sport, which means there's no emotional stake, no we, no reflected glory, no loss to grieve. It's not coldness, it's not personality failure. They simply never formed the psychological bridge that turns strangers in jerseys into my people. And the question is, why do some people build that bridge and others never do? Here's something most fans never realize they're doing, and it makes the situation so much worse. When the World Cup comes around, non-fans get hit with a wall of pressure. How do you not watch this? Come on, it's the World Cup, everyone watches. You're un-American. Wait, actually, this is a complicated one we'll get to. And here's psychology. The harder you push someone to care about something they're indifferent to, the more resistant they become. This is called psychological reactance, a theory developed by Brehm in 1966. The principle is simple. When humans feel their freedom of choice is being threatened, they don't just maintain their position, they actively move away from what's being pushed on them. In plain English, the louder the crowd says, "You have to watch this," the more the non-fan's brain digs in and goes, "No, absolutely not." It's not stubbornness, it's a built-in psychological self-defense mechanism that protects personal autonomy. And the kicker? This effect is stronger in people who score high in need for uniqueness, a trait identified by researchers Snyder and Fromkin in 1977, describing people who are psychologically driven to stand apart from the crowd. These are often some of the most creative, independent-thinking people you'll meet. And yes, they are statistically more likely to be the person in your life who has never watched a single World Cup match and has no plans to start now. Here, because this is not a rule and there are clear exceptions. But the data is consistent enough that it's worth saying plainly. Introverts are significantly less likely to be passionate sports fans, and the reason is rooted in neuroscience, not preference. Research going back to Hans Eysenck in the 1960s and confirmed repeatedly since shows that introverts have a higher baseline level of cortical arousal than extroverts. In English, their nervous systems are already running a little hotter, which means that the high-stimulation environment of a stadium, a packed bar, or even an intense group watch party, screaming crowds, emotional swings every 3 minutes is genuinely overwhelming for an introverted brain, not exciting. The extrovert's brain needs that stimulation to feel alive. The introvert's brain hits overload fast, and this extends beyond just the watching environment. The social rituals around sports, the group chats, the obligation to have opinions on players and coaches, the collective emotional experience, all of that requires sustained social energy that introverts have in limited supply. So when an introvert says, "I just don't care about the World Cup," what they're often actually saying is, "The cost of participating in the social performance of this event is higher than any reward I'd get from it." That's not apathy. That's a completely rational calculation by a brain wired differently. Might be the most important one for understanding the people in your life who check out of the World Cup or sports entirely. There's a concept in psychology called meaning-making, the process by which our brain decides whether an experience, event, or outcome is worth caring about. For this process to activate, two things need to be true. 1, the event needs to connect to something you already value. 2, you need to believe your emotional investment will produce something: joy, belonging, identity, purpose. For sports fans, both conditions are met automatically. The sport connects to their identity, their community, their history. The emotional investment produces belonging, those we moments. For a meaningful percentage of people, researchers estimate somewhere between 20 to 30% of adults in the U.S. have low sports engagement. Neither condition is triggered. They look at a football match and their brain runs a quick scan. Does this connect to anything I value? Will caring about this produce anything meaningful for me? And the answer that comes back is, not really. This is not a failure of imagination or empathy. These are often people who invest enormous emotional energy just in different directions. Into their work, their creative projects, their relationships, their faith, their hobbies. The emotional capacity is there. The trigger just never fires for sport, and forcing that trigger, telling them to just get into it, is like asking someone who doesn't like coffee to just taste the notes of cherry and dark chocolate. You either taste it or you don't. Here's the one that doesn't apply to most countries, but applies massively to the U.S. In almost every other nation in this tournament, football soccer is the dominant sports religion. It's what your grandfather watched. It's what you played as a child. Your national identity is partially built on it. In the United States, soccer competes with the NFL, the NBA, MLB, the NHL, college football, and college basketball for cultural real estate. Gallup polling has consistently shown that American football is the most popular sport to watch in the U.S., with around 37% of Americans naming it their favorite. Soccer historically ranked 5th or lower. What this means psychologically, most American non-fans of the World Cup didn't opt out. They were never opted in. Their social identity formation around sport went in a completely different direction toward teams, leagues, and rituals that were already embedded in their family, their school, their city. The World Cup isn't something they rejected. It's something that simply never occupied the slot. And there's an irony here. The 2026 World Cup is being hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. FIFA specifically chose this to grow American fandom. Whether it works, whether that psychological social identity bridge gets built for a new generation of American viewers, will be one of the most interesting sports psychology experiments of the decade. Okay, this is the part that the sports world doesn't want to admit. There is a genuine psychological advantage to not caring about the World Cup or any high-stakes group event you didn't choose. Here's what sports fandom actually costs, psychologically. Research published in the Journal of Applied Sport Psychology found that fans of losing teams show measurable increases in cortisol, the stress hormone that can last 24 to 48 hours after a match. For some highly identified fans, major tournament eliminations produce a grief response neurologically similar to personal loss. That's real stress, real cortisol, real impact on sleep, mood, and cognitive performance. Now compare that to the person sitting across from you who doesn't care. They watched the game, felt nothing, went to bed, woke up the same. Psychologically, they are in a more regulated state. This doesn't mean fandom is bad. Belonging, shared joy, collective identity, these are profound human needs, and sports meets them beautifully. But the person who doesn't need the World Cup to feel those things, they've likely found other, more direct routes to connection and meaning. And that, quietly, is a form of psychological security that's worth acknowledging. So let's bring it home. The psychology of people who don't care about the World Cup isn't mystery or malfunction. It's a combination of things, a social identity that never formed around the sport, a psychological reactance that pushes back harder the more they're pressured, a nervous system often introverted that finds the stimulation overwhelming instead of exciting, a meaning-making process that never found a reason to engage, and in the US specifically, a cultural landscape so crowded with competing sports that soccer never claimed its slot. These aren't people who are broken or cold or missing something. In many cases, they are psychologically secure, deeply autonomous individuals who simply invested their emotional energy elsewhere. And the next time someone in your life seems completely unbothered while you're screaming at the screen, maybe the question isn't what's wrong with them. Maybe the question is, what did they find instead? If this video helped you understand yourself or someone in your life, drop a comment below and tell me, are you a die-hard fan, a complete non-fan, or somewhere in the middle? I genuinely want to know.